Okay, so a little bit of context. I recorded this video back in like October and it was supposed to be for Halloween, but unfortunately due to a bunch of real life stuff and lack of motivation, I just never got around to doing it. And instead I went and made the Among Us video I posted around then, which ended up being my favorite video I posted that entire year.
Go on, speak your truth. Speak your truth, Pierce.
No.
Oh.
But since I have the audio for this recorded already, I figured I might as well get it done. But I am recording a new intro for this because the other one was Halloween related and is very well past the time of Halloween. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. Predaplants. This series of dark plants played a big role in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 anime, being used by one of the major antagonists, Yuri. And throughout his several duels in the anime, we have a few cards he used that never got printed, with 7 in total being Predaplant related. So let's talk about them and see what we can expect could be changed for them. First up on our list is Predaplant Lizard, or Lizard if you will. It's a level 3 dark plant and its only effect is that it draws a card when special summoned from the graveyard. Mind you that this isn't a hard once return, so it could lead to some goofy stuff happening, though likely not for Predaplants as they only have a few cards that can summon from graveyard. And I don't think Konami wants to keep around a guy whose effect is basically card of safe return for itself, so it would likely have to be changed. And an obvious change to give it, and what I'm expecting it to get, would be changing its effect to a mini Graceful Charity effect, similar to what cards like Elemental Hero Liquid Soldier have. Not only would this put this more in line with how modern cards work, it would also be fitting for how this card was used in the episode, as it was summoned twice from the graveyard, allowing Yuri to draw 2 cards. This would also support the archetype being able to possibly discard cards like Biblis or Planning, which could then set up their graveyard effects. Alternatively, if we want to go the Dark Golem route, we could have it search 2 Predaplant spells, since the 2 cards Yuri got off of Lizard were spell cards, though I think the former effect will be more likely since those weren't Predaplant cards by name. Lastly, and this may seem like a strange thing to say, I think Lizard should either be made into a tuner monster or have a way to become a tuner. Why would I think that? Well, during Yuri's duel with Yusho, this card was revived by Ultra Polymerization, and in the anime, Ultra Poly had an effect that allowed it to treat one of the monsters summoned as if it was a tuner. So I think giving Lizard the ability to treat itself as a tuner when summoned from the graveyard, or simply making it a tuner to begin with, would be a great way to call back to the scene. Plus it's not like it would be the only Predaplant tuner to exist.
Oh my god, it's corn!
Next up is Sephus Snail, a level 4 with 1300 attack, and its only effect is that it can't be destroyed by battle on attack mode, and any battle damage you took is cut in half. Okay, I will be completely upfront, this card fucking sucks. I don't know which part is sadder, the fact that it only protects itself from battle destruction, or the fact that it's required to stay in attack mode to even get that effect off. When cards for decades prior could get away with being protected from battle destruction while in defense mode, Sephus Snail shouldn't be forced to stay in attack to get this effect. If this guy wants to be even considered, there's going to need to be several changes. Mainly that it needs to share its protection with the rest of the team, and it needs to protect them from card effects as well. And it's not like that's an unreasonable request given that it wasn't destroyed by a card effect in the anime, it just had its effect negated. I do think it does need another more proactive effect to go with it. Personally, I'd like a Predaplant that can special summon a guy from hand or graveyard so we can trigger Cobra if we open it, but we don't know what extra effects it could possibly get if it was printed, so yeah, currently, Snail, not great. Their final unreleased monster is Predaplant Stellia Worm, a level 4 whose only effect is that once per turn, if a card or effect is activated that would change a monster's attack points, you can negate and destroy it. And honestly, this isn't a horrible effect, but I feel like we could make it a bit more thematic to a Predaplant with a very simple change. If instead of negating an effect that changes attack values, we change it to negate a card with a lower level than Stellia Worm. That would make it more in line with Predaplants hindering enemy levels using predator counters. Another effect we could possibly give it is the ability to summon itself from grave, since Yuri revived this card with Predaplant Reborn, which I'll talk about later. I could see that specific effect being to special summon itself from the graveyard if your opponent specials a monster from the extra deck, while you control a fusion monster. Also could see it gaining a level from this effect as a reference to it becoming a 5 due to Performapal Flat Rat's effect. This would also give the effect a bit more punch since even without counters, it can already hit monsters that are level 4 or lower, which is a very common level. Honestly, this one I'm decently confident about with how its effect is going to be changed, and could see some uses for it being printed. And that's good because honestly, out of every Predaplant design, this one is one of my favorites. The thorny body with the flower-like mouth opening to reveal the single eye is such a cool monster design that greatly shows why I love these cards. That's it for the monsters, so let's head on to the back row. Starting with Rapid Seedfire. While it may not be a Predaplant card by name, it is by effect, as it lets you send a level 4 or lower Predaplant monster from deck to graveyard to inflict 300 damage to your opponent, then reduce the attack of the opponent's monsters by 600. Also, if it gets destroyed, it pops cards your opponent controls up to the number of Predaplants you currently control. I mentioned earlier how Lizard having a discard effect would be beneficial since this deck has good graveyard effect, so it shouldn't be hard to see that a card that says send a Predaplant from deck to grave is already starting off strong. The burn effect seems pointless due to how small it is, and it would be if we didn't have to deal with time rules. I understand that the time rules are very frustrating, but time cards are a thing we have to consider, and the best ones are the ones that are naturally weaved into our combos. And since we already wanted to use this to ban a Predaplant, we will definitely be taking game and time along the way. The attack reduction on its own is a bit underwhelming though. I think a more thematic change would be changing it so that it places a Predator counter instead, and instead it having a lingering effect that monsters with counters lose 600 attack per counter. Would be also nice if it was a quick effect, so we could use it both to start plays by sending Biblis, but we could also use it on our opponent's turn, sending something like a Drosophilum Hydra in order to interrupt them. Also could be nice if it lets us send our back row, since sending Planet off of this and using the fuse on the opponent's turn would be a very fun play. As for the field wipe effect, I got nothing, it's alright. Only other thing I suggest to change for this is giving the clause that it's always treated as a Predaplant card, so that way it becomes searchable. So the next card we're gonna talk about is a it's a bit of a problem one. Ivy Bind Castle negates the effects of all face-up cards your opponent controls, prevents their monsters from attacking, deals 800 damage to your opponent each standby phase, and the only catch is that you have to tribute a Predaplant card or this card destroys itself. I don't think I have to explain why this card is so insanely busted. Even with the maintenance costs, having an archetypal skill drain that is also an Imperial Order and Royal Decree and Cauldron of the Old Man all at once is kind of ridiculous. And you know what the craziest part about this card is? It didn't even work. Yeah, I expected this to be the card Yuri used to stall out Yusho and build up to his win during his duel, but literally on Yusho's next turn he bounced Sky Magician to his hand, which triggered its effect to destroy this card. So not only was one of the most busted cards that has ever graced the Yu-Gi-Oh! Clowned on, a card that would be speedrunning onto the Forbidden List, that wasn't even a major card in its only appearance, but the entire archetypal part of this card never came up, and as a result, we have nothing more to talk about here. This card will never be released in its current form, but we have no way of judging how it will be changed because Konami can do literally anything with it. Honestly, the only thing I feel like mentioning here is that despite looking like a field spell, it's actually a continuous spell for some reason. For a more positive card to talk about, we have Predaplant Reborn, which just special summons a guy from the graveyard. Pretty basic stuff. You'd think that would leave it in a situation where we don't have much use for it, especially since it is a trap card so it can't be used as a play extender, but bringing back a Dragos Depelli or a Predapower Dragon during your opponent's turn so they can use their soft once per turn effects again is actually a very valuable trick you can do, and honestly justifies this card being considered. It's also likely going to have a graveyard effect like the other two Predaplant trap cards, though I'm not sure what that could be. Probably something like recycling a Predaplant to hand. The final Predaplant specific card is Predaprouting, which when activated can use one of these two effects or both simultaneously. When a dark monster is targeted for an attack, destroy the attacker, also the target isn't destroyed by battle for the rest of the turn, or you can special summon 3 Predaplant tokens, which are dark level 1 monsters. I think the first effect being replaced with generic battle protection for Predaplants and dark monsters would be much better than just giving it to a single guy. Especially since you're going to be summoning 3 tokens as well, which will basically just become clay pigeons for your opponents. And as for the token summon effect, only change I would suggest would be summoning up to 3 rather than 3 flat, since Currently, you need to have the space to summon the tokens in order to even bring them out in the first place. It's also a fun effect to have because if you find a way to quick fuse on your opponent's turn after summoning the tokens, you can just jump scare your opponent with Trip, which can be really fun. It's not amazing, and you definitely prefer getting Planning or even Reborn over it, but it's a cool card to see, and would be a welcome release. So that was every Predaplant card, and every card with a Predaplant related effect, but also tell you about every other card Yuri used in the anime, since some of them could become Predaplant cards when released. The first two being Destruction Flower and Destruction Fruit, since those two are comboed together, though they are kind of weird. Both are continuous spells that require you to send continuous spells to the graveyard to even activate them, but you are able to send your opponent's continuous spells to the graveyard. Fruit triggers when a monster you control is destroyed, letting you target that monster in the graveyard, then reduce the attack of a monster you control with 3000 or more attack by 3000 to special summon that monster back. And Flower triggers when a monster is special summoned to your field, letting you both target a monster you control whose original attack is different from its current attack, and a monster your opponent controls. Your opponent takes damage equal to the difference in your monster's attack compared to its original attack. Then your opponent's monster loses attack points equal to the amount they took. These cards are so weird because they were designed with a specific loop in mind, but that loop also requires two specific monsters to be on field, and those monsters need their anime effects because the anime effects aren't hard once per turns like their TCG effects. Also, any use of this card would basically just result in an FTK, which I want to say Konami wouldn't approve of, but we saw what they did with gimmick puppets. Yeah, like Ivy Bind Castle, these cards are a bit of a problem and they would need some major updates in order to be released. I guess they could make these cards hard once per turns to try and solve the effect, but honestly, if these cards were hard once per turns, they'd be so weak that it feels like there's no reason to print them at that point. I doubt we'll be seeing these anytime soon. Violet Flash technically shouldn't be here because it was never actually used in a duel. Instead, Yuri just used it out of the duel to flashbang Yugo a bunch. It does have an actual effect though, saying that it applies 2 effects until the end of the turn when it is activated. Your opponent cannot respond to poly or fusion cards with spells and traps, and once per turn when you fusion summon, you draw a card. If it was a lingering effect for the rest of the duel similar to Morganite is, I could vaguely see this being considered by someone, but as it is, it's an unsearchable spell that barely provides any benefit. The unrespondability effect doesn't even stop monster effects, so it's not even like you could use it to prevent something like Ash Blossom on Branded Fusion. There are ways I could see this being buffed, but I think it's just boring. Darkseed Planter is a more interesting one, however, as it turns all of your opponent's monsters into darks while it's face up, and when one of their dark monsters attacks one of yours, it negates the attack. So the attack negation is there, I guess. It's not really something super interesting, but what is the attribute chain. A bunch of your fusions have generic fusion material, usually just requiring a dark monster. So by turning all of your opponent's guys into darks, you suddenly make them super vulnerable to things such as super polymerization and branded banishment. Speaking of banishment, if they update this to turn your own monsters into darks, this would help out the branded variant a bit. Seems a bit weird since most of your guys are already darks, but there are 2 monsters specifically that aren't that this would be very important for, those being Guiding Quim and Blazing Cartesia. I've been messing with these 2 in the branded variant a bit, and they can be some great extension if you get use of them. Cartesia especially, since she can get you to another fusion. It's really good, but there is also the occasional issue that these are both light monsters, and sometimes you'll need them for a fusion that requires only darks, namely some situations where you'll want to use one of them for the fusion summon of a Dragostapelia. These becoming darks with Planter would be really nice since it would allow you to use them for those fusions, and potentially use it for a fusion on your turn, such as a Chimera Flesia. These issues are usually ones that come up every few duels, so I doubt it'll be amazing, but I could see some fun things done with it, though it would need to be treated as a Predaplant in order to be searchable. And that also applies to our next trap card, Dragonvine. It's a continuous trap card that can only be activated while you control a dragon monster, and it lets you target a dragon monster your opponent controls, except the one with the highest level, and take control of it. It's basically a more situational snatch steal on a trap card, which can be good since that means you can steal something on the opponent's turn. But this does trip over 2 things. 1, the monster you're taking needs to be a dragon. And 2, you cannot target the thing with the highest level. Meaning, if there are no monsters with levels, this card cannot be activated. I could see some of these issues being changed though. It no longer needing to target a dragon and being activatable even if there's nothing with a level would drastically improve this card's playability. Would be also nice if it could be activated if you controlled a dark plant, since Predaplant is a dark plant deck, and you're not always ending on one of your dragons. Also giving it the Predaplant stipulation so it can be searched. Not the card I'm super dying to see get printed soon, but I think it would be a nice one to get. Extra Shade Reborn activates when a monster originally summoned from the extra deck is destroyed, and lets you summon one with a different name who was originally summoned from the extra deck as well from your graveyard, provided they are a level lower than that one. It basically gets you to a weaker version of a guy you already summoned when that guy dies. It was used by Yuri, but it was also used by Yugo, so it's as much of a Predaplant card as it is a Speedroid card. Finally, we have Ridiculing World, which gives your opponent's monsters 100 more attack until the end of the turn, at the cost of those monsters not being able to attack while their attack points are different from their original values. I was gonna say if that last effect was a lingering restriction so that it applied to ones special summoned after those ones, I could see it being used to prevent an OTK in a stun deck, but then I realized you'd just rather play Threatening Roar at that point. I get that it's supposed to be Evil Smile World, Frowning World.
It's genius. Why didn't I think of that?
But with an effect this bad, Ridicule is all you can expect this card to receive. And that is every Predaplant card, and a couple of extra cards I felt like throwing in. Do I think we'll be getting any of these anytime soon? Well, considering the last time we got support, our only release was Starving Venomy Dragon, I'm just gonna assume we're not getting anything and be pleasantly surprised if we do get something. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good night everyone.